Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Lytton Phil here in the centre of Newcastle upon Tyne. And we're sitting here in the Sir James Knott room, for those of you that know the Lytton Phil, surrounded by the most extraordinary books and bookshelves everywhere. I'm Cinzia Hardy. I am the founder and outgoing artistic director of November Club. I'm also the director of Lost, Found and Told, New Audio Tales for Northumberland. And I'm absolutely delighted that you have chosen to join us this evening. It feels really exciting to be in a real live venue with real live people and us four not wearing masks, because we're allowed to do that if we sit down, which is why we'll be sitting down this evening. The event is in two parts. The first part is to discuss and explore and delve into the world of Lost, Found and Told. And to do that with me, we have the creative team that made the audio tales. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions, and we really hope that you'll ask some questions. Now, to ask a question, all you need to do is to pop it in the chat, as you would if you use Zoom. And then Andrea is going to pass the questions over to us in a little while. And make sure to say if there's a particular team member that you would like to address that question. Just because some of you have been in touch with me personally, and I'm not picking anybody out especially, but I want to thank my sister in Dublin for being here today, and Paul Herriot, who's in County Clare, because if it wasn't for Paul, who signed that very important memorandum of articles about 15 years ago, there'd be no November Club. So thank you, Paul. We have Mrs. T up in Amble, and Mrs. T, I hope that you won't be too disapproving of our plastic bottles. Right, but welcome to everybody. So let us begin for this first part of the event. Let me start with introducing the creative team. So here to my left, we have Fiona Ellis, who wrote the tales. And sitting beside Fiona, we have Katie Doherty, who's an associate artist with November Club and the composer of the songs and the tales. And last but not least is the sound designer, Matthew Tuckey. And Matthew and I have had a lot of laughs over the past couple of months, listening to the tales over and over again, until they were, until they were absolutely perfect. He is a complete stickler for detail, and I completely approve. So let us begin. I'll start with Fiona, if that's all right. So Fiona, how did you find using established fairy tale forms and structures? How did you find that process in the writing of something that actually is completely new?
Interesting question. Yeah. Let me start by saying I got my orders and they were use fairy tales. So you never question your orders, you never question your commissioner. But when we think about fairy tales, there are too many people who think sort of Disney, little fribbly things that fritter about, Tinkerbell, that sort of stuff. We weren't dealing with those kinds of fairy tales. We were also dealing with folk tales. So folk tales and fairy tales. For me, folk tales are the sort of get down and dirty bit of the storytelling. They're where you get your boots clarty. Tinkerbell never gets her boots clarty. So the fairy tales that we chose to use, we picked them out as a group. We did a bit of work in progress with actors in a room in those wonderful days when you could have actors in a room. And we improvised around fairy tales. We did lots of research. We gathered together ideas that we could weave in and out of fairy tales. So it turned out to be an incredibly productive process. I think fairy tales work because in fairy tales, as soon as an audience hears the words once upon a time, or once there was a farmer's daughter, or in a long time ago in a place far away, something happens. You make a contract, you make a deal. And the deal is, I'm going to tell you a story, so you just sit back and listen to the story. And in this story, people won't have complex characters. They'll embody something. Some of them will be naive, some of them will be clever, some of them will be greedy. Some of them won't even have names. They will have adventures. Bad things will happen. You will be frightened. You will snuggle up into your chair and pull your blanket up. But it will be okay, because that's the deal. We'll work it out. Things will change. There will be magic. There will be all kinds of stuff going on. Things will change. It'll be okay. And because you've got that framework, you can drag in all kinds of layers. You can pull in all kinds of themes. You can make changes. I don't know if you've listened to our fairy tales yet, but you'll go, oh, this is a story about, and then it isn't. And that's what happens with fairy tales. You get the liberty to do that.
Absolutely. And, it has to be said that the project was originally envisaged as a live performance, which I'm not going to say why we haven't done it as a live performance. And Hannah Fox, who hopefully is here tonight as well, who is in Cumbria, though, in real life, in real time, would have been co-directing the show with me. And as Fiona mentioned, we chose the fairy tale structures and worked with actors, a bunch of very, very talented, multi-talented actors from lots of different disciplines, from a clog dancer to a clown, to a stage actor. And Hannah and I sort of set out into the county of Northumberland to talk to people, to find out what they thought might be important to them, say in 100 years' time if it disappeared. Trying to, I suppose, just really drill down into what is it about Northumberland that people who live here, who have been born and bred here, or maybe have memories of it as a time when they came up here on holidays. What is it that's important to them? What is it that draws you to the county? So that brings me to themes within the tales, as Fiona mentioned, because obviously there was an array of ideas and thoughts from the people that Hannah and I interviewed, and then poor old Fiona got presented with all of these themes together with the actors in a room. So Fiona, can you say anything about your thinking behind the tales in terms of the themes then that you pulled out and chose to weave into those structures?
Well, people who responded to the first set of workshops were very clear about a lot of the things they wanted us to bring in. They wanted us to bring in, young people wanted climate change to be addressed. So we managed to do that. If you listen to our tales, you'll find comments about how forests grow and what kind of forests they are, mixed planting or just monospecies. You'll find things about overfishing. You'll find things about greed. You'll find things about how wonderful... Okay, here's a really good example. Northumberland is one of those rare places left in the UK where you can see the stars. You can go out onto the moors, you can go up to Kielder Forest, and you can really see that dark sky. That's a characteristic of Northumberland. So we brought that into our story. And we also managed to weave in the bits that threaten Northumberland. So there's too much traffic. There are too many aeroplanes. There are too many house lights. There's far too much visual noise so that those dark skies are threatened. Elon Musk, who has some qualities, is putting up numerous satellites every single week. He's throwing up more satellites, and that is confusing the picture of the skies. So if you listen carefully to the tales, and you might have to listen more than once, you will find things like that woven in and underneath into the texture of the tales.
Which brings me to the point, I hope you've all been listening to the tales. Because if you haven't, now's the time to start thinking about listening to them. Hanging on to those thoughts, Fiona, let me turn to Matt, because some of the feedback we've had in terms of what people are really enjoying about the tales is how they evoke the atmospheres. The atmosphere of Northumberland, and that's obviously through the sound design. So would you be able to say a little bit about your approach to making the soundscapes?
Yeah, so a key starting point for me was field recordings. So going and recording the actual natural soundscape of specific locations. And a lot of the locations that I chose to record in were mentioned in the tales. So I started in Amble, recording the dawn chorus of the seabirds there, which is, for those of you who visited Amble, you know, it's very evocative and very, it gives a great sense of place when you hear those seabirds, and they're most active at the early hours of the morning. So look at me, driving up to Amble first thing in the morning. And that was sort of that set the tone for how I went about creating a lot of the soundscapes for the rest of the pieces. So going to places like Kielder and battling with the sounds that the pollution that we're talking about, of the noise pollution as well, of machinery and forestry and people.
I mean, some of the things that people have picked out are indeed the natural sounds.
Yep.
And the sound of water is particularly dominant. And I remember you asking me about how you might approach, I suppose, weaving all the tales together with a cohesive soundscape.
Yep.
So water was what you sort of settled on.
Yeah. So wherever I went and recorded in Northumberland, there was always some water present. There was always a stream. When I was recording up at Greencroft on the Wall, I imagined to get a lot of wind and a lot of sheep and a lot of cows and some birds. But there was actually an incredible amount of water from streams, and obviously at Amble there'll be a lot of water there. So it is quite a through line almost in the soundscape that sort of connects all these different soundscapes together. And contrasts quite nicely with one particular one, which we won't ruin for you if you haven't listened to them yet, but where you hear a lot of man-made or human noises entering into this sound world that we made.
Because there was a mixture of going out out into the countryside and recording natural sounds, but also, I remember leaving the studios up in Thropton one day, leaving you and your colleague with a rather interesting array of metal and saws and all sorts.
Yeah.
Because you were creating new sounds.
Yeah, so we were doing a bit of additional sound design, so we were finding new source materials, and a lot of that stuff we recorded that day was for a lot of the more mystical elements to a particular story. So in The Fisherman and The Whale, we have a lot of bowed metal, so there's a lot of ship noises in there, or there's this sense of a huge mystical creature. It's a whale, but it speaks, so it's mystical. So to give some sense of that weight and sense of character, and to give it an emotion attached to that particular character, the bowed metal, I can remember sort of demonstrating my idea for you in the studio, and straight away it had the reaction we were looking for.
Yeah. And I think that took a lot of the actors by surprise as well, because when the actors were in recording, I think they weren't all practiced at working through this medium, and they kept asking, didn't they? And I'm not used to working this medium either, and it was all new to me, and they kept asking, but how am I going to render? And you would say, no, just say the lines, just say them nice and slowly, and I can then manipulate the lines. Now, usually if an actor is told they're going to have the lines manipulated, it doesn't go down very well. But in this instance...
We won their trust.
Yeah.
Let
me move to Katie, because we have two new compositions in the audio tales, and alongside some traditional music. But it's the new compositions that I think we're all particularly interested in. So there are two songs. One is called She Is, and that features a lot in the piece. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that song, its inspiration, maybe the process and approach you took?
Yeah, well, there was always going to be a song that needed to weave all the way through all of the stories to come back in different ways, in different textures. And so I came to the process after the stage version, so it was quite well down the line and quite well formed by the time I read Fiona's beautiful tales. And the thing that struck me instantly is the way that all of the tales encapsulate the length and breadth of Northumberland as a county, and the landscape, and the difference between the hills and the coastline, and the quirks and the characteristics of all the places that Fiona visits in those tales. So that was the first thing that I thought, well, whatever this song does, it needs to be resonant with that. And then I think quite early on we knew who was going to sing the song, and that is Jane Holman, whose voice I know very well, and whose voice for me instantly when we said that Jane was going to sing it, I thought her voice encapsulates Northumberland for me. Obviously she's from relatively nearby, so she has the accent, but the quality of her voice, when you listen, you will hear, and you should definitely listen to Jane singing in whatever way she sings, because it's just fab. But her voice has a warmth, and it's welcoming, and it draws you in. You want to hear more. But it also has, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but it has like edginess. It has a roughness, a gravel. And for me, that really encapsulates Northumberland. So writing for Jane was a real treat. And the next part of the process was when November Club launched the Dear Northumberland campaign.
Those postcards, yes, we called it #Dear Northumberland, I think.
Yeah, so that was an invitation for people to address a postcard to Northumberland. And it happened during the first lockdown, so there was a lot of quite emotive, actually, responses through those postcards about places that people were just, really loved, really passionate about, their favourite places to go, their favourite aspects of the county, their places that they felt were secret to them, that nobody else knew about. They sent us pictures, and basically everyone else wrote the lyrics for me. because
oh no, you're giving the secrets away.
Yeah. Well, they
get
were
your
so
audience
good.
to work for you.
Yeah, they were so good, and I ended up with just a great long list of things that were lyrics, basically. And so I think I basically weaved all of those things in the manner that they were given to me into the song. And then it just felt really obvious to personify Northumberland, because people had done that in the way that they had worded their postcards. And then because Jane, for me, represents everything that is quirky and brilliant and unique about Northumberland in the way that she sings and performs, it felt right to make Northumberland a person, and so that's what the song does.
And the device worked very well, Fiona, didn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to say a little bit about, because we kind of came to that through Katie's composition, and then we talked about you writing some additional text.
Yeah, we didn't just want to, here's story number one, end off, here's story number two, because we wanted there to be a continuity. So we made Jane be the person who introduced the stories, but also she was the voice of Northumberland, and she kind of, her role as the voice of Northumberland was to say, oh, that was a bit scary, are you really terrified? Don't worry, we're going to sort it out, just be patient. And then move on in, and then say things like, well, that embodies the character of Northumberland, that little girl, or I shouldn't give away any plot lines here, but drawing out of the, what you as an audience member are kind of supposed to draw a little bit out of the stories. So the voice of Northumberland weaves those, and she is your friendly guide. She is the one who says to you, I'm going to take you on this journey around the county, around Northumberland. And at the end of it, we will all together know the story of Northumberland. But also, the story of Northumberland continues. So she kind of hands it back to you, and we go on with this story. It's your story.
And that actually segues rather nicely into a question I wanted to ask you about the role of the landscape. In terms of writing the tales, and actually for all of you, in terms of kind of creating this world. So the landscape obviously features a lot in the tales. Is that an important factor within fairy tales themselves, Fiona, do you think? Or is it something you just wanted to add?
I think landscape is usually pretty important in fairy tales. I mean, there are certain sort of tropes, dark forests that are scary, moors, winds, all those things. But Northumberland is so blessed with fabulous landscape that it gives gives a writer quite a lot of freedom to do coastal stuff, to do border things, to do crags and so forth. I was listening to them again after a long break, and I find that if I stick my earphones in and I go out for a walk in the countryside, that for me is the nicest way to hear all of this, because the noises that come through the earphones from Matt and the ambient noise outside kind of mix up, and it's lovely. But what it does is it reminds me to look at the countryside. It reminds me to look around me. Now, I don't think I can pick out things like bog myrtle and junipers that easily on my walks at the moment, but I hope to in the future. And I hope if you get out in the country, you'll find them too. But you'll also, I think, become more attuned to the quality of the wind. Northumberland's very windy, very windy. And I think if you go to the tale about the boy in the tower, that's kind of where someone who is not Rapunzel, stands in a tower and he can't get out of the tower. And so what he does is he looks around him at all of Northumberland, and it deepens his appreciation of Northumberland, because that's all he's got to look at, and he's got no one to talk to. And so thinking about that made me feel very strongly about the wonderful Northumberland landscape and the seasons. You can't get everything you want in. There is so much more to say, but I hope it makes people look at Northumberland and appreciate its variety, which is amazing.
And actually that leads really nicely to ask Katie about the song that you wrote
yeah.
for The Boy in the Tower, because that was a standalone piece rather than that more woven piece.
Yes, that was a different process, because obviously it had to serve a purpose for the tale. So at that point in the tale, without, I hope, not giving too much away, the boy is like you say, he's stuck in the tower, and well, I'm imagining he has a window that he can see the whole vista of Northumberland from somehow, magically, and so he's an observer, and he is, and it's really interesting what you were saying earlier, Fiona, about all of the contemporary themes that are in the tales, because that was something that really struck me when I first read them, that there was so much like the climate change stuff, and also the thing about folk tales is that they are universal, and they've been around for so long, and there's a reason for that, and it's because the same thing happens again and again and again, unfortunately, and so that thing about greed and power comes into it as well. So I was imagining this young person observing the world as it is today, and specifically in Northumberland, and I think at the time that I was writing it as well, I was in lockdown with a small child, and so and I live on the border of County Durham and Northumberland, so the landscape's quite similar to where the tower may well be, and I was doing a lot of thinking about how young people were perceiving what was happening at the moment, and I think that there is a proper sense of that in the stories as well. So that's kind of where I went to. That's the place that I went to with the boy in the tower, it's a young person's observations of Northumberland, but also a very current world that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, there are a couple of lines in that song that I really liked about. I want something about, I want to understand why people do the things they do, and there's a sort of sense of it's not just a why do people do things, it's a why on earth are you doing these stupid, terrible things?
Yeah.
And wanting to get out and make changes.
That's exactly the type of question my little boy asks me on a daily basis. But it's so poignant that young people will ask those questions, and it does make you go, yeah, that's a really good point. Why are we behaving like that?
Yeah, why are we destroying the thing we love?
Yeah.
And Matt, how hard was it then? Because you had to weave all these contributions together, because actually it fell to you in the end, didn't it? I was describing the shape that I wanted to see. Katie was composing and Fiona was writing, and then the actors came into the room, but actually it was for you to think about how all of this would be sewn together into a cohesive whole.
I think a lot of that came out of our work in the studio together, though. So you didn't just land a bunch of recordings on my plate and say, there you go, puzzle it together. We had a lot of conversations while we were recording about, because it was the first time I was hearing any of this read aloud, my instinctive reactions and saying, for example, going back to Jane's narration, I remember us sitting there recording that particular bit of narration from Jane and me turning to you and saying that this is just like we're sat by a fireplace in a bothy with Jane holding a mug of tea and telling us all these wonderful stories, and it's all cozy and comfortable, and you just sort of, from the actors' performances and from you describing your vision for the piece, we sort of, I think we quite cohesively came up with a plan together. And then it fell to me to put everything together out of that sort of instinctive understanding of the piece, I'd say. And also from working with Katie in the studio and hearing the music and working with the actors and hearing all the traditional songs they were doing, I think all these elements have been so well made for this one piece that really they quite naturally all fitted together. And when you sit there and listen to it, you can hear, well, that's not quite right. We need to bring the pace up here, or we need to slow this down and have more room here. And I think just they were so wonderfully made for each other. It was just sort of putting them together in their rightful place.
And Fiona, when you heard all that, how did it make you feel to suddenly hear all those elements come together?
Well, it was fantastic. I mean, no, nothing I have written before has been done in this way. And to me, it is so much more than a talking book because of the music, because of the soundscapes, because of the way it's all woven together. It just pulled it all together. I thought, we haven't talked about the actors, but the actors are fantastic. And they're some of my favourite voices. They're some of my favourite storytelling voices. So it felt fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I know you have, I haven't, and I don't know if the two of you have had a chance, but I've only heard them sitting down, or cuddled up on my settee at home. I haven't walked out into the landscape to hear them. Have you, Katie? Have you?
I
had time?
haven't, but you've sold it to me, Fiona. I'm definitely going to do that.
Matt, have you had time to do that?
I haven't, no. I felt like I listened to them quite a lot.
Give it a break and then come back.
Yeah.
I feel like I might listen to them in the car.
Yeah. Because I can imagine they'll sound very, very different. I mean, we'd had earlier conversations about could we change this stage piece into a series of audio walks, but actually it then became clear they hadn't been conceived as audio walks. They had because Fiona was commissioned to write them as stories. And then Hannah and I were going, well, as we did in the R&D, what we did is we pulled poor Fiona's stories apart and then staged them. In fact, changed a lot of dialogue or added dialogue. But in a way, how did that feel suddenly, Fiona, to be asked to revert back to the original stories?
Well, I'm going to have to say guiltily that it felt fabulous, because originally they were going to take the story outlines and they said, well, we won't be using the words, just write the stories for us, because we'll be using puppets and movement and everything else. And I was going, oh, fine. Small tear. And then they gave them back to me, and I got to write them with words, and I got to put in the verbal descriptions and all of those other things, and I got to put in my own jokes. And so I'm sorry. I deeply regret that we didn't get to do a stage show, because the stage show is fabulous, but I love what's come out of it.
And just something I want to flag up is that actually one of the stories, Kindness to Strangers, was also recorded by a young performer that we discovered whilst we were doing some work with refugee families in southeast Northumberland. And we recorded that story, Matt, didn't we, in Arabic. Now, Matt and I are now fluent in Arabic. Absolutely, aren't we? And much to my amazement, Matt, you felt able to do the final edit on that.
I have to say, with a translator. So we worked with the translator in the studio, and I think his input to the process was very helpful, not just to understand what was being said, but to understand how it translated thematically into Arabic. So things like ice cream being in English for specific.
Ice cream, I think, was what the,
Well, how it's
the
maybe how it's
translator
pronounced.
told us.
Yeah,
Because that's a more hip way of describing ice cream, apparently.
apparently, yeah. And there being an Arabic joke in there as well was
Oh, go on, tell us the Arabic joke. The joke in English is
Okay,
in
so
kindness to
in
strangers.
the story, the girl, this is like our Snow White character, but instead of being something as boring as beautiful, her special characteristic is that she tells terrible jokes and everyone laughs. So the terrible joke that she tells in English is, what do you call an animal that stares into your eyes and makes you go to sleep? A hippopotamus. It's terrible. But it doesn't translate quite like that into Arabic. So
Well, what
it's an
happened
Arabic joke.
when we met the translator, Matt?
yeah. So Faraz translated it to be what doesn't melt in water, a fish.
And we all just went, yeah?
Yeah, that's a bad joke.
It probably works really well in Arabic, we hope.
It probably does. And that particular tale in Arabic won't be available until the week beginning the 25th of January next year. And it forms part of the Great Northumberland Winter Festival. So that'll be available through the November Club website. And so just keep up to date with the website or socials if you're interested in that bilingual version of Kindness to Strangers.
But even if you don't listen to that one, you'll hear Khalil
Well, this
playing
is absolutely.
his tambour.
Well, I think Khalil Abdul Rahman has been a complete joy to work with, but he's a complete star. He is the most amazing musician. I mean, you haven't met him, Katie. Yeah. And he plays, I think it's called a tambour, and he played that with Lawrence Neal, who's a fabulous drummer, those of you that know Lawrence, who lives in Newcastle. And they did all the instrumentation for that story in English, didn't they?
Yeah, we managed to weave elements into other stories as well. So there's a point where in the Brag, the Wish and the War, we go back to a village and there's a celebration and we needed a drum because it felt appropriate. So managed to weave in a bit of Lawrence's drumming into that story as well, which is nice.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if we have any questions. No questions coming in. No questions? Are we that brilliant that we're answering everything that you want to know? Well, I've got some questions that I have gathered from people who said, oh, I can't come tonight, so I've got a question. And this one is for Katie. Is it harder or easier to create a song using other people's words?
Oh, that's a really interesting. Depends whose words they're.
It's a very
Diplomatic.
Yeah. I would say on the whole, for me, and every composer and songwriter is completely different in their process, I know. So for me, it's harder. But it depends completely on lots of different things. But yeah, I'd say generally it's harder, but not if the words are really good. That was a terrible answer.
Fiona, if you had to write another fairy tale for Lost, Found and Told, what would it be about?
Oh, well, now, yes. I mean, I did have one about a lonely lighthouse that fell in love with the DFDS ferry. But we couldn't fit it in. We couldn't fit it in. The ferry was a terrible flirt. Because I wanted another seaside one. But I think we toyed around with stories where the stones of Hadrian's Wall told their story, where they'd come from, how it felt to be on the bottom of the wall. And in fact, there's a lot more you could do with stones, because it's not just Hadrian's Wall, it's all those other lovely dry stone walls. And they're a real craft. And that reminds me that there are stories about lost crafts that we don't have in Northumberland anymore that I'm sure would make beautiful stories.
And I remember when Hannah and I met the dry stone waller up in the national park, Northumberland National Park. You know, he was a volunteer, and it's mainly those dry stone walls in the national park are looked after mainly by the farmers, but a lot of volunteers are the ones who sort of keep up that old tradition. And his big worries about the future for Northumberland was that from the sky, Northumberland will look very different if people don't learn those skills. Because the farmers, and Katie will know more about this than I do, because you live up on a farm, is that, you know, it's expensive and time-consuming to build the walls with the, you know, in that old dry stone walling technique. So they're tending to use fences now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, not on our farm.
Good.
Yo.
Good.
Yeah.
So, you know, the dry stone waller that we interviewed said, you know, it's a dying art form. So, you know, in 100 years' time, you could be looking down at Northumberland from the sky, and those dry stone walls, which for whatever reason aren't there, can't stand up anymore, could be gone. So it was interesting. Fiona, which is your favourite tale and why?
Oh, well, I'm quite fond of the story about the girl who rescues the brag, who then owes her a wish. This is set around Hadrian's Wall, and I like that one. I made that one up myself. That's one of the things that I like about it. Although I'm sure it has echoes. You see, it will have loads of echoes with other fairy tales and folk tales down through the age, because that's the nature of these things. Themes recycle round and about. What's your favourite?
Gosh, what's my favourite? I think actually the one, the wall, the wish, and the brag, but also the fisherman and his wife. Which I think, if I was just going to ask you, what's your favourite, Matt?
Yeah, I think, you know, this the fisherman and his wife. It's a lot of fun.
I mean, Phil Corbett, who narrated that one, I mean, the range of his voice is quite phenomenal.
Yeah, we said there's all fantastic voices and all the actors, but I loved Phil's performance for the whale. It's such a great source material to then take it further with and just give that sense of, you just see this great big whale.
Yeah.
I have a question.
You have a question?
I have a question. Cinzia, do you think there will ever be a live show of fairy tales?
Oh. Well, I don't know, I suppose is the answer. I don't know. Maybe. But then I think this piece is so well crafted, and I think all our contributions, and the actors, and the musicians, and Ella, your niece who sang, the boy in the tower, I think we've made such a special piece of work. And from my point of view, I'm really proud of this being my last production, because it is my last production for November Club. I'd feel no need to put them on the stage. I think if I wanted to tackle the fairy tale theme again, I might want to start all over again. Have we got another question? Oh, great.
Okay, Fiona, were all the stories and tales from your head or old Northumberland tales? Love from Ben, with a kiss. Who's Ben?
Hello, Ben. He's back.
Is that Ben Martin by any chance?
That would be a nice thought.
That might.
Our actors.
No, they weren't old Northumberland tales, because of course some of them are based on. I mean, when you listen to them, you'll probably spot allusions to Rumpelstiltskin, Snow White, Rapunzel, people like that, but they're not in it. So no, because those were traditional fairy tales in order to make that pact with the audience. But after that, we have Braggs and Hobbs up here. Of course we do. They're Northumberland things. So I borrowed those. Well, no, I didn't borrow them, actually, because they live here. I'm visiting, as it were. But the actual tales, no. They came out partly out of the improvisations that we did with the actors, and partly just out of thinking what would be good tales to tell about, to draw out the characteristics of Northumberland. Yeah, that's probably about right, isn't it?
I have one here for Matt, but I think you might have kind of addressed this already, is how do you find the right sounds to add into any of the work that you do? How do you source your sounds?
Well, thematically, this one was quite clear from the beginning that it was going to be naturally Northumberland, except for when it's magically Northumberland. So again, the field recording was the starting point, but then we created some specific magical sounds. So the hob appearing and disappearing, and a lot of that just comes from experimentation. So starting with quite a natural source. So that was actually it's quite a sort of whistling whip sort of sound, I'd describe it as, when the hob appears and disappears. And that came from just playing around with a tin whistle and sort of whooshing that through the air.
Is that what that was?
Yeah, that was just
Lovely kind of zip.
yeah, a little
wasn't it?
sort of flashing sound and just manipulating stuff. The idea sort of loosely being trying to keep it to very organic or very sort of natural sounds, or something that could sound like it could be from the real world, and rather than having wind chimes for the cliche fairy tale spell.
And I think that's, sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's something, that was a recurring theme right from the beginning when this project first sort of, I think, kind of germinated as an idea. Because Hannah Fox, who has designed the lovely graphic, the album graphic, was very keen to stick to, paper, wood, found and organic materials. And I think that feeling has come right through the piece.
And it contrasts well with, going back to what Fiona was saying about wanting to draw people's attention to the natural world and to our impact on that. So what it felt like to me is I was trying to portray the best of Northumberland. It's like you're doing a portrait of someone that you love, you want to show them in their best light, but then you bring in these unnatural sounds, the ones that, or the polluting sounds that we're less keen on being present in Northumberland. That then gives such a more dramatic contrast, I feel.
I think some more questions are coming, Katie.
So this is for you, Cinzia, and it's from David Cracknell. And David asks, has November Club explored the possibility of connecting with organisations like the Ramblers to encourage dissemination of the project and stories themselves?
Well, David, that's a brilliant idea. Catherine, get on the case, please. No, that's a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've understood at November Club, having never done anything like this before, that unlike an opening night of a show, and then it finishes in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. This is something that we can continue to revisit as people tell us what they think about it. So, as people send us some feedback, so please continue to tell us what you think, good and bad. We can only learn by things that maybe you don't enjoy. It's a medium I think we'll want to continue to explore. So that's a wonderful idea. Yeah.
We've actually got a follow-on comment from Curious Arts from David's suggestion there, saying, David, that is a very good idea. Ramblers, hikers, and maybe local B&Bs or youth hostels or accommodation who could share with visitors who are heading off to walk across the land.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Brilliant. We've made a note of that. That's really good. Thank you for that.
And then this is to everybody. After the experience with Lost, Found and Told, does the panel think we will see more theatrical work online and in different formats?
Well, that's a great question, isn't it? It's a great question, I think, for all of us who are making creative work at the moment. I think it's one we're asking ourselves a lot of. Let me ask Katie, have you got a view on this? And what would it be?
Yes, I think certainly in the short term, because we can't do anything else at the moment. So also it's such a upskill for everybody involved. I think I've learned a huge amount about audio in this last few months. So, and I think it takes a lot of investment and time to get to the point that you can do it successfully. So I think it would be a shame if all of that sort of disappeared overnight. I think there's a lot of questions about how we monetize that and accessibility questions, and that could be a whole other panel discussion, I think, especially in terms of, obviously I'm coming from a musician's perspective. It's not the same in terms of connecting with your audience, so that has to be thought about a totally different way, but it's not the same in terms of generating an income as well. So Yeah.
And I think November Club, I mean, I'm on my way out of November Club, and in the second half of this event, we're going to meet the new artistic director who starts in January. And I'm sure that he would agree with me when I say that we have learnt an awful lot, and it has all been positive. Obviously, we'd much rather be making live work, but we're not going to stop considering ways in which we can work in digital formats and on digital platforms, because we have found that we have, I suppose we've connected with audiences that we've never connected with before, just by the practical fact that maybe people can't leave their houses for reasons nothing to do with the pandemic. So I think it's a very interesting format, but I would very much hope it's not the future full stop. Yeah, because we all love live. Right now, I think have we any more questions? No, we haven't. So I'm going to draw this part of our event to a close. I want to thank everybody who has joined us this evening, our audiences, people who have been in our shows, my trustees, the chair of my board, Fiona Stanfield, who's a total star, our funders. I want to especially say hello to Jez Casey and Nicholas Bonefield at the Arts Council, because you've been just terrific, not just in this past year, but over the years, over the past 15 years. But to everybody, actors, everyone who's been involved in all our productions, stage management, production, the lot. So we're going to take a short pause, just a couple of minutes. We're going to reset. You can get the audio tales and a memory stick now as well. So with Christmas around the corner, that might be a nice little stocking filler. So we're going to come back in 2 minutes, and I'm going to hand over November Club to Joe Houghton, whom you're going to meet next. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Lost, Found and Told is a short series of 7 stories set in Northumberland. They are stories of loss and finding, of courage, the false and the true kinds, of love and kindness in unexpected places, and of the strength and resilience of Northumberlanders. They are not true, and yet they are all true, as stories with magic always are. She is new flowers and foxtrots. She is wind's warning. She's a welcome to the wanderer and those who heed her calling. And when you think of home, you think of her. When you think of home, you think of her. She is pubs and pipes and kippers. She is spuggies and sparrows. She is fairy folk and footsteps, and all the best of Maras. She is woodland and window. She is heart song and breathing. She is by the river running, and with the swallows leaving.
Once there was a village deep in a valley. Not many people lived there, but those that did liked it. Soon, she came upon a little cottage. It isn't there anymore, but you can see an old coal cart that marks the place. She was so very, very tired that she just wanted to lie down. So she went inside and dropped into one of the beds and slept. She was still fast asleep when the owners of the cottage came home that evening. They were 7 miners and were very surprised indeed to find her. They woke her up, and after they got over their shock and she told them her story, they all introduced themselves. They said,
I'm called Pud, 'cause I'm fond of a puddin'. And this is Muckle. He's a big lad, 'cause he eats 2 puddings to everybody's one.